on the agenda. I'd like to make some comments as we start on this. Well, I want to correct one thing Mr. Garrison said about the lifeguards and the operation funds. Impact fees cannot be used for operations, whether by the Parks Board or anybody else. They can only be used for capital improvements. And the accountants for several hundred years have been very clear about what capital improvements are versus operations. Capital improvements are the purchase of something new. It's not maintenance of something that already exists, and it's not salaries or operations. So the impact fees do not affect operate. It can't be used by the Parks Board or anyone else for operations. I understand the issue. I think the schools have read all those studies that say, you know, kids having shorter vacations is better for learning, so they've shortened the summer vacation period. You know, when I was elected in 1995, I'm going to talk a little bit about history here, as I think it's important to understand. We had 41 acres actually of parkland. 20 acres that had been turned over to county parks because we only had 1.5 full-time parks employees. We had a director and a part-time assistant. So the city of Carmel owned 41 acres and was operating 20 acres of parkland. Today, the Parks Department operates over 800 acres. The city has several hundred acres as well, including the Monon Trail and other things that are owned by the civil city as opposed to by the Independent Parks Board. The middle of January, second week I was mayor, I took a bunch of people interested in parks. We went out to look at a piece of land we could lease to more than double that acreage, and we did that within a few weeks after I was sworn in, and we've worked for 28 years to have an award-winning Parks Department. There's no question. I had to condemn 246 pieces of park property and have people standing outside protesting, shouting "No Monon Trail" at us when we did the Monon Trail. There's no question that I think we're all here today trying to figure out how best to operate our parks. The city, though, decided to do something that most suburban cities have never done, and that is to have a very traditional downtown core, in line with my Republican and conservative values. When a city has to tell people they want to move to it, that we want you, but you can't have any apartments or condos or townhomes or duplexes. You all have to live on single-family lots. That's really government telling people how they have to live. And strong cities don't do that. They have options for people. And so we look very carefully at how the great cities of the world, prior to the advent of the automobile, were designed. We read the literature, the academic literature, and there's some great works out there, particularly Dick Jackson's Urban Sprawl and Public Health, Suzanne and Henry Leonard's Genius, the European Public Square, Jeff Speck's books on walkable cities, A Suburban Nation, Rise of Sprawl and Decline of the American Dream, and a whole host of things. A more recent one by women at NYU, Seth Lowe, just wrote a great book on how to design cities in this day and age and accommodate cars, but still make them people-centered and people-oriented. You know, when I ran the first time, I had thousands of people say to me when I was as rich, and man, I think you've probably knocked on a few doors lately. Well, I did that in 1996, thousands, and have done it in subsequent elections as well. People, you know, how do we build a downtown? And so we've learned that we had to build up to about 4 to 5 stories for the stores and the retail sector to work. Otherwise, it just doesn't. There's not enough people that are able to walk to these places. It's pretty well in the academic literature. But then when we build at those levels, public plazas, urban spaces, small ones, they're not suburban parks. They're different, but they're still park space. They're part of the civic wealth where people have opportunities to come together. And these, to build beautiful cities, if you look at the great cities of the world that were built prior to the car, they all have hundreds of these places. You walk through downtown London, every 2 or 3 blocks is a tiny little park or square for those areas of town. And to do it without that, suddenly we have a bunch of army barracks lined up. And we don't want that for Carmel. They are just absolutely key in the downtown area. And it's difficult when we enter into these public-private partnerships with developers. One piece recently, a couple of acres, was just sold for $15 million. I think it's between 2 and 3 acres in downtown Carmel. Do you believe that? Think about that 30 years ago when we couldn't get a developer interested in building in downtown Carmel. And so when we ask that developer to give up a quarter an acre or more for a public plaza in that area, there's real money that developer is contributing to that, and that is often missed. The public plazas, public areas are small. They don't look like some of the parks, the suburban parks that we're used to, but there are parks nonetheless. They meet the definition of parks in the truest sense of the word. There are places for people to gather, to get to know each other, to recreate, to enjoy nature. And we put a lot of money and time into those efforts. Examples I think you know, but would be Carter Green, the Reflecting Pool, Veterans Plaza, Midtown Plaza, Sophia Square, the small place by the ice cream store, the Nash building. Sure, benches and a fountain, but that becomes a public space. And I see dozens of people out there all summer long. Sophia Square, sure, it serves the area that people live right there, but other people go in that area. It has become a great public space where events are held. Of course, the play equipment along the Monon Square improvements, all these things are very important to our urban core. Midtown Plaza, we talk about the Parks Department winning awards. Midtown Plaza won award after award for the level of design the quality of that design. We've gone out, this is why Midtown Plaza, or I call it Square Midtown Plaza, has won so many awards, national awards. We're on the same list with projects in New York, in San Diego, Seattle, and Chicago, to name a few, and that list of 10 or so that received an Urban Land Institute award for that project. So not only does our Parks Department win design awards, so is the CRC on the places they have built. When Mr. Westermeyer was still executive director of the Parks Department, I went to him and said, we need help building these urban parks if we're going to build at this density. And I think after consultation with the then Parks Board, he responded to me, and you remember this, Mark, that there really wasn't much interest on the part of the Parks Board in putting money into these urban parks. He said the CRC should do it. So as we move to this, the impact fees are, some have said that the developers should provide these parks. And I don't think that's fair either, because they are paying park impact fees. And then to ask them to pay for additional parks is really doubling the amount that they are, or in many cases, more than doubling. And we do want to be competitive for investment in the city. And it's always been my thought that in the urban core, when those fees are used, they ought to be used in that area and not really taken from the urban core and used in suburban areas. The legal issues, I had asked our Corporation Counsel in 2020 to review this issue. And he has a memo, and he very clearly went through all areas of state law, the applicable statutes, the applicable local laws, and laid out exactly how this could be done and how it would be done legally and properly under state law and the city ordinances. And I'm comfortable with that memo. there's always, you can nitpick, okay, the money went to this bank account instead of that. The substance is all correct. And I don't agree with Mr. Bosman's interpretation. State law is broad as to how this happens. The key thing is that it has to go to infrastructure. And so every penny that has been expended by the CRC has been expended for capital items. It hasn't gone to maintenance, and that's the distinction that's made in the statute. You know, I'm happy to continue to review other opinions, and we'll let the lawyers work on that, but we've had opinions. I've confirmed them in the last 24 hours with our legal staff, and they agree with the 2020 memo that I had requested, that we're doing this properly, and that's the, I'm sorry? Oh, okay, thought I heard somebody. That's been followed. Let me move to the 111th and Penn. And this may be an issue of just not communicating well the direction the CRC is moving in as we continue our core development. I've all seen the core is really between Keystone and US 31. We have along US 31 a very underutilized area. It was 1980s and some early 1990s and some 1970 large office buildings. Most of them consist of, 20% of that land use is tall building surrounded by ugly asphalt parking lots. And what the most progressive cities across the globe are doing today is looking at those parking lots and seeing how they can be turned into urban villages. Not only are they ugly, I always joke in my talks, anybody go for a manic walk past the Walmart parking lot recently? But that's what we have through those areas. And the CRC is in, this one has been in the newspaper every way, the Gateway Project with the Parkwood folks, about turning those parking lots into an urban village that would be no more than 5 stories tall generally. You might have a little bit that's 4 stories or 3 stories and one that's 6, so there's some variation in the architecture, but an average of no more than 5 stories. We don't want to be like Singapore. I just got back from China, and those cities are, they're building just ugly, big, tall buildings everywhere for their millions of people, and it's a terrible city design in my opinion, although their streetscapes are beautiful. We don't want to build like that. We want lower urban densities, but we can do that. The key is it's very expensive to put the cars underground and in structures. And so that's why we enter into the tax incremental finance deals to pay for that. The impact, but when we do that, having green spaces in public plazas, civic areas for people, just not from those future developments, those neighborhoods, they really are neighborhoods. Some say, well, the developers profit from that. Well, the developers that have developed next to Central Park have developed Central Park. The developers always benefit if the city does its planning properly and invest in park infrastructure, whether it's in an urban area or a suburban area. But the intent is to take, we're in discussions with 2 other large building owners along US 31 to turn those areas into urban villages, and 111th was designed to complement that area. We also just annexed the Home Place areas, our last annexation in Clay Township a number of years ago, and seeing that investment go to that area is very important, even though it's technically not in the Home Place area, it's adjacent to it, and will help the Home Place area. But this is designed as, again, part of an urban core. It's designed at low urban densities. And so the park spaces in that area become very, very important. We have made agreements with the developer after long and protracted negotiations in each of these cases. It's a question whether the investment would be made, or at least made the way we want it made. It would become a much less desirable development if the public plazas and courtyards and small parks were not built. Is absolutely key to doing it right.
All right, can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, can I say something? 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 All right, can I
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
Okay.
Of course.
I've been on the board for a long time. I love the city of Carmel. I hated Indiana when I moved here. I love Indiana. It's a wonderful place to live. Carmel was a beautiful, small city. I love that small city. And I agree we needed to grow some. But in our growth, I think we've lost part of our Carmel charm. I mean, I understand everybody loves downtown. But my biggest problem is I feel sad for all the apartments, the condos, and the townhouses I let be built, because I think we have so many now. What do you think, Lori? I mean, do you think?
Well, my feeling is that we've studied the type of housing that the people younger than myself are wanting and desiring, and I hear it from my own experiences just talking with people who are younger than me. And they do not all want the single-family home with the yard maintenance and everything else that goes with it. They want a more simplified life without all the yard chores and things like that. So I don't have an opposition to the type of development that we're discussing here today. And since I'm speaking now, I'll just speak to my feelings about these items that have raised some dust in the last week or so. It's rare that I'm contacted about any item on any of the agendas. When are the agendas posted? How early are they posted?
The agenda is posted.
Like made public?
Like the Thursday prior to the meeting.
Okay, so how many days?
Six
Okay.
calendar days.
So there has been time for people to be aware of this issue. I'll just put that out. So my concern about these issues is I feel like there's still some legal questions that are being bantered around, and I guess my opinion is I support generally what these are wanting. However, when I'm hearing from people that so-and-so attorney says this is illegal, it's state statute against the city statute, things like that. I asked Mr. Oberlander to be here this morning because there was discussions, his name was dropped, and my concern is if there's legal issues, then let's give this 2.5 weeks or whenever our next meeting is to get all those things out in the open, get them all settled, and then let's move forward with whatever information comes out in the next couple weeks. Would it be a hardship to delay this to the next meeting?
Yeah.
It would be a hardship?
Let me defer that. There's a couple of other comments I wanted to make about this. I invited Mr. Klitzing, even though he's not a direct appointee, into my department head meetings some time ago. And these meetings generally are held twice a month on Friday afternoons at 2. Sometimes we do them weekly, but at the minimum the last few years of twice a month. And each of these projects has been discussed in those meetings. Now, Mr. Klitzing may not have known the exact amount of calculation or something, but these are not a surprise. All these projects have been discussed because we're discussing them from a police response standpoint, fire department standpoint, an EMS response standpoint, ingress and egress, the amount of money needed to get cars in and out appropriately, whether the road are there, and so on. And I know that Mr. Mostesky, who's out of the country today, as well as Mr. Klitzing, meet on a regular basis. And I want to talk a little bit, too, about park financing. I met with Mr. Hensel, Township Trustee, over a year ago. And I arranged for our fiscal advisor, Kurt Brainard, who's a talented government finance expert in the state of Indiana, to prepare a demonstration of how the township could choose to make up some of the funds that are being lost through the payoff of the lit bonds because the law has changed. And we presented that to Mr. Hensel and asked him to, take that proposal and discuss it with the board and move ahead with it because it would have solved a large portion of the funding issues. He's chosen not to do that. I don't know if he discussed it with the board or not, but never did. So that disappointed me. The other thing we have to do, there's just not enough money with this legal change to support the parks the way we have been supporting them. These impact fees, I want to point something out. The Pet Quarry project at 111th and Penn is probably going to be built over 12 to 15 years. So these fees are paid at the time the permits are pulled. They're not paid now. And so regardless of what this board does, it's not going to provide the funds today to develop the suburban parks that the board would like, and I'd like to see developed. It's just not going to do that. It would be something that would be done. And because we don't know what the economy is and whether Pegora or any developer is going to be around. I mean, it's a very strong, solid national company. Sure, they will be. But you can't borrow against these funds. It's not something you can take to the bank and say, we're going to get these funds. It's too much of an unknown in advance. So you can only spend them. You can't borrow against that. Or you say, if you did, it'd be terribly high interest rates because of the uncertainty. No lender is going to do that, more than likely. So these aren't funds that are immediately available today. And this isn't a pleasant thing to say, but if we want to continue to develop parks, we're going to have to look at a dedicated fund for operations and capital expenditures. And that's going to have to be done outside the existing city budget because there's not the revenue there to do it and do other things the city has to do to continue to provide decent services and safe roads and so on. And, homeowners are capped at 1%. Our business taxes are far lower than other entities around us, all of them. And we're probably going to have to ask the voters through a referendum whether or not they support parks. And I think they will. I think having that discussion. But these impact fees are not the solution to it. They're not enough. And it's a lot of money, granted, in bulk, but it's over many, many years of time. And you can't borrow against unanticipated income. So it's not the panacea that I think some people think it may be. And then we would end up with a bunch of, the developer has the right to develop at the zoning that's there, but then we end up with less than desirable developments because the public spaces, the places that are all shared, that make this urban density palatable and beautiful would not take place. To answer Lori's question, I don't mind delaying for 2 weeks. The lawyers can discuss this. I'm absolutely confident. I don't know, John, did you want to speak to the legal issues involved today? Okay, that's fine. The former Corporation Counsel's memo is very clear and concise, speaks directly to the points that have been raised, and I'm comfortable with it. I have no objection to delaying or tabling these items until the next meeting, but we have made agreements with the developers. The investment is contingent upon that, and we need to proceed with these. If the next city council wishes to change this ordinance, I'm sure there can be a robust discussion about the pros and cons and park financing in general. This is not the panacea to the park issue. This is not going to fix the park funding issues. That's going to have to be done through a referendum and work with the township. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's a process much like we funded the fire when we had a contract for fire many years ago, borrow 1 year, paid off the next, and each year without a serious impact to the tax rate. That can be done.